Hello, I am here to talk about where is America's diet and where are we at. The scientific report for America's health for the next 5 years came out and the recommendations. What happens is you have industry leaders get together and they look at America's health based upon the evidence, and then they come up with goals. It really hasn't changed too much since the 90s, where basic dietary guidelines are half your plate are fruits and vegetables, incorporate whole grains and lean protein, and 10 to 20% of your total calories should, 10 to 20% or less, should be coming from added sugars. 90% of Americans don't do this. So when you have these dietary guidelines that are given out, 9 out of 10 people don't meet these recommendations. And so you kind of think, okay, like they're not reading the recommendations anyway. Preventive health, which is by definition and scientific forums, is reducing your risk. Okay, so statistically, there's no such thing as prevention, but you can reduce the risk of certain outcomes. Dietary behaviors is one of those that has been associated to the reduction of risk. And so statistically, there's a lot that has to happen to get to those types of definitions and parameters. So you need large scale studies. You need evidence-based research, to collect research, collection of data, including food intake. And so a lot of times it's really hard to do randomized controlled clinical trials, double placebo with humans and food, because of the access of people, because food is so personal, and then try to replicate it in real life. It takes a lot of money, a lot of time, which if we're wanting evidence-based research to kind of keep up with the demands of technology, you need a lot more money. And so what we have is based upon the research that has been done at really highly educated states. And so that would be the information that's kind of funding what people call sick care. But I digress. I'm a dietitian. I've been a dietitian for almost 20 years. And in my practice, I take 6 major insurances. I also take self-pay, so clients that just want to pay on their own without insurance. And the interesting part is maybe 20 to 30% of my time, maybe not that much, maybe 15 to 20% of my time is I have to deal with the insurance because insurance carriers don't reimburse too much for prevention. There needs to be a medical diagnosis for me to intervene. So then when you have these dietary guidelines, which most people don't follow, what is a way that we can increase these behaviors? You have to look at large scale interventions where people spend most of their time, which is work and school. And so how you can get involved in people's places of work, how you can get involved in people's places of employment or school is through public health guidelines. And so when you look at different cultures, sometimes there's nutrition professionals that are involved in public places and it's funded. To my knowledge, where I live, there's not a nutrition professional that is least on salary or being paid to work with public education children in elementary ed or middle school or high school. It's typically a specialized, maybe something that a employee has a personal interest in, but then that can get kind of interesting because have they received formal education or is it they've done their own research, which may be pretty accurate, but nutrition is one of the most interesting fields because you have something that you actually can have anecdotal experience in. And when your beliefs and when your experience feels stronger than science, you get in really dangerous spaces, meaning say I had the ability to do my own surgery, or say I had the ability to, write my own prescriptions. I would go based upon my experience or how I felt, and I wouldn't necessarily want to listen to someone that I don't know. That happens in nutrition sometimes where we listen to the advice of people that we know, like, and trust. That feels good, and sometimes the science gets ignored. And so in nutrition, there's science and then there's emotions. And emotions sometimes will take over, which is we're emotional creatures. And so the science will point to what the dietary guidelines are in right now. And if you're interested in any of those, you can look them up. The scientific report just got published from 2025 to 2030. The biggest problem, I would say, is ultra processed foods, which there is no United States definition right now. There's just a classification that was termed in Brazil called the NOVA classification, which classifies, I believe, processed foods into 4 to 5 categories. There isn't a classification system in the United States to date. And so it makes research really hard, because then words matter in research, words very much matter, and they mean different things as professionals would agree, and there's no consensus in ultra processed foods. So then when you get into the free market and you have consumerism, you have people who can create anything, produce anything, they can throw around these definitions that all mean different things, like the word toxic, like the word process, like the word healing, like the word wellness. They mean different things in the free market, where in science, everything is repeatable, duplicatable is the word I'm looking for. Everything is standardized. And so it creates this dichotomy of, I want to follow what I know, like, and trust. And sometimes science gets behind the fads because it takes time to find evidence that is reliable, that is accurate. And also requires a bit of money, which sometimes public sectors aren't funded because of demand or need. So the dietary guidelines, some people will say, are outdated, are not up to date. And I would say, well, let's look at the big picture. Most people aren't eating fiber, which I would find it hard to have any professional agree that that is a bad thing. And most people are around ultra processed foods. They're easy to access, and they're typically emotionally really appealing. They have high fat, high salt, high sugar, and that's a very emotional, very pleasurable experience. And then they market to my senses. They market to my culture. The food industry does. And so I know, like, and trust the brand, and I'm going to follow that brand, whether that's conscious or subconscious. And it's hard to argue that. It's really hard to argue with the belly because it has no ears. And sometimes our hunger drives don't listen to logic. They're going to listen to survival, which is sometimes emotions or emotionally driven. So in general, the dietary guidelines, I just kind of went off a tangent. The biggest theme that came from the last 5 years was make every bite count, and watch and be mindful of your added sugars. Keep it less than 10 to 20%, under 2, no added sugars. And that has been proven over and over again to reduce your risk of major chronic diseases. If this was helpful, follow along. If not, scoot on by, and I'm happy you're here.